This documentary is not a gentle thought experiment. It's a forensic walkthrough. We'll look at specific artifacts, texts, and chemical evidence, from Sahugun's 16th century descriptions of Teonanacat to scholarly reconstructions of the Eleusinian Kaikion, and ask one blunt question. Did ancient people intentionally use psychoactive plants and fungi in religious rites? And did those experiences become the stories religions are built on? Some of these theories have been whispered in back rooms and shouted on talk shows. Others started as careful scholarship and then ballooned into controversy. We'll be direct. Where there's clear evidence, we'll say so. Where there's speculation, we'll label it. But at every step, we'll show you the artifacts or studies that let us make that call. All over the world, religious specialists, shamans, oracles, priests, used sensory techniques to produce visionary states. Drumming for hours, fasting, dancing, rhythmic chanting, isolation. These techniques are well documented and universal. But in many places, they were paired with something else, a substance taken to open the mind.
Those substances are not modern inventions. Archaeology, ethnography, and ancient texts show people using psychoactive plants and fungi for millennia, sometimes to heal, sometimes to divine, sometimes to commune. The implication? Chemically induced vision was a legitimate route to the sacred. We begin where the evidence is strongest and least disputed, Mesoamerica. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, missionaries recorded indigenous terms and rites. One word stands out, Teonanacatl, divine mushroom. The Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún described mushroom ceremonies in his Florentine Codex, and multiple colonial sources corroborate communal mushroom rituals used for divination and prophecy. This is a concrete anchor. We know the Aztecs used psilocybin-type mushrooms in religious contexts. That's not speculation, it's primary historic documentation. When we look at the Xochipilli statue, the Prince of Flowers, and the flora carved on the base, scholars see a ritual context for visionary plant use. Beyond Mesoamerica, visual art hints at ancient fungal cults. In Spain, the Selva Pascuala mural contains fungoid figures that some researchers argued depict neurotropic psilocybe mushrooms. The proposal dates their use to Europe to as early as 6,000 to 8,000 years before present. In Central America, carved mushroom stones found at sites like Caminaljuyu show stylized mushroom forms and are often interpreted as ritual paraphernalia. Those interpretations are contested. Art can be ambiguous, but the pattern is striking. Images and artifacts suggest ceremonial mushroom use across widely separated cultures. The idea that this is a global fluke becomes hard to maintain once you stack the examples. Now we shift from hard documentation to a famous and explosive possibility. For nearly 2 millennia, the Eleusinian Mysteries in ancient Greece were the most famous secret rites in the Mediterranean. Initiates reported life-altering visions and a promise of a better afterlife. But the rituals were secret. Participants could not speak of them under penalty of death. That secrecy left a gap, and some scholars filled that gap with a startling hypothesis. The kaikion, the initiatory drink, contained psychoactive compounds, possibly ergot derivatives, that triggered the visionary climax. The most influential modern statement of that idea appears in The Road to Eleusis, a book by R. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hofmann, and Carl Ruck. Hofmann was the chemist who discovered LSD. Together, they proposed that ergot-derived alkaloids in the kaikion could have produced the sacred revelations at Eleusis. Not every classicist accepts that. Critics point out that the traditional kaikion recipe described in ancient sources looks like barley, mint, or thyme, not a carefully prepared ergot brew. But the proponents answered with plausible preparation techniques and biochemical pathways for how ergot alkaloids could have been concentrated and made psychoactive. The upshot: the ergot kaikion theory remains active and debated in serious scholarship. Across the Eurasian steppe, another mysterious sacrament appears in ancient texts, the soma, the divine drink of the Rig Veda. Scholars have long argued what plant or combination of plants soma actually was. In the 20th century, R. Gordon Wasson suggested Amanita muscaria, the red and white fly agaric, as the candidate. Other scholars proposed ephedra, or complex mixtures that included Syrian rue or grasses. The key point is this: the Rig Vedic descriptions, talking about pressing and filtering the plant to make a sacred draught and linking it to the mountain realm, are compatible with multiple botanical candidates. Modern scholarship shows there's no single consensus. There are persuasive arguments on several sides. The story of soma demonstrates how a sacrament can be described in myth while its precise botanical identity is lost to time.
Now to the biggest controversy, Christianity. In 1970, Dead Sea Scrolls scholar John Marco Allegro published The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, arguing that early Christianity encoded mushroom worship, and that language and ritual points to psychoactive sacraments. His book was sensational and, from the academic angle, widely rejected.
In the last 5 years, Brian Muraresku's The Immortality Key has reignited one of the most controversial theological debates of the modern era. The idea that the earliest Christian sacrament, the Eucharist, may have been rooted not just in wine and bread, but in a psychedelic tradition, stretching back to the mysteries of ancient Greece. Muraresku's thesis connects the dots between the Eleusinian Mysteries, secret rites performed annually for nearly 2,000 years in honor of Demeter and Persephone, and early Christian liturgy. At Eleusis, initiates consumed a secret potion, the kykeon, which some researchers argue may have been laced with psychoactive compounds derived from ergot or other plant and fungal alkaloids. But Muraresku goes further. He argues that this entheogenic, that is, God-infused tradition, may have threaded itself into the earliest Eucharistic gatherings in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. And here's where the language gets interesting. The word Christos, long before it was applied to Jesus, already existed in ancient Greek medical and ritual contexts. Linguistically, it's a noun formed from the verb kryo, meaning to rub, to anoint. Applied to a person, it meant the anointed one. Applied to a substance, it literally meant ointment. Now think about that for a moment. Christos was not originally a name, but a title, and one deeply embedded in the world of oils, resins, perfumes, and possibly medicinal or psychoactive balms. The idea that early anointing oils might have had more than symbolic properties, perhaps psychoactive ones, is exactly the kind of possibility that makes scholars either lean in or slam the door. And that's the problem. Among mainstream Christian scholars, the idea of a psychoactive Eucharist is virtually taboo. The very suggestion threatens to undermine centuries of theological orthodoxy. Still, there are tantalizing breadcrumbs. One of the more intriguing comes from Ammon Hillman, Ph.D., a classicist specializing in ancient Greek and Roman pharmacy. Hillman has translated ancient medical and ritual texts that describe ointments and potions with mind-altering effects. His interpretations are, let's say, controversial. Critics accuse him of overreading the pharmacological implications. Yet tellingly, no other classicist seems eager to publicly debate him. Add to that the residue analyses. In recent years, archaeochemists have detected traces of alkaloids, cannabinoids, and other plant compounds in ancient vessels, some from early Christian-era contexts in the Mediterranean. There are even fragmentary recipes from the Greco-Roman world describing beverages in ointments, mixing wine, honey, herbs, and fungi. But here's the sober reality. While these findings might fit into a theory of sacramental entheogen use,
they don't prove that early Christianity as a whole engaged in such a practice. At best, the evidence suggests that some local, possibly fringe Christian communities may have incorporated entheogenic elements into their rites, perhaps as a continuation of older pagan traditions. The responsible conclusion? It's plausible in certain pockets. It is not, and never was, the universal foundation of Christianity as practiced across the Roman Empire. Siberia recorded use of Amanita muscaria in ritual contexts. Shamans sometimes drank the urine of reindeer that had eaten the mushrooms, a crude but effective way to attenuate toxic effects and concentrate muscimol. The result? Altered states used for divination and healing. This practice is one of the clearest pieces of ethnographic evidence linking a specific mushroom to religious practice. Some scholars have argued that Norse berserkers used intoxicants, perhaps amanita or poppy extracts, to enter trance-like battle fury. Evidence is suggestive but thin. Saga descriptions, some skeletal chemistry, and circumstantial cultural parallels. Again, possible, not proven. Across the ocean, Australian Aboriginal cultures have complex ritual systems, many involving sensory deprivation, song, and other non-chemical means, but some groups used plant medicines to assist vision work. The global pattern continues. Multiple methods to access the sacred, sometimes chemical, sometimes not. What makes this whole project suddenly urgent is modern clinical science. Studies at institutions like Johns Hopkins have shown that psilocybin, the active compound in classic magic mushrooms, reliably occasioned profound mystical-type experiences in controlled settings. These experiences often produced long-term changes in mood, outlook, and spirituality. Put bluntly, the same kind of experience that ancient initiates described can be produced, in the lab, by psilocybin. Here's the straight assertive claim we'll stake on the table. Entheogens, plant and fungus-derived psychoactives, were in many cases intentionally used in ancient religious rituals. Where we have the most direct evidence, Mesoamerica, the link is undeniable. Where we have ambiguous but plausible evidence, Eleusis, Soma, some Mediterranean rites, the case is credible, supported by experts and disputed by others. So the conservative but provocative conclusion is this. The chemical induction of altered states was a common route to religious experience, and those experiences shaped core religious narratives. Did organized religions later suppress, sanitize, or reframe those sacramental experiences into doctrine, priestly hierarchy, and allegory? That's where history gets political. There is evidence of suppression of non-orthodox rites, women's rituals, localized cult practices in late antiquity and medieval period. Whether that suppression was specifically aimed at hiding a mushroom sacrament is still debated. But the broader arc that sacred pharmacology lost ground as institutional religion centralized control is supported by historical patterns. So the next time someone tells the story of a prophet hearing the voice of a god, ask the quiet question, were they lifted by faith or guided by a fungus?